hymnal, the specific ones that we're going to cover. And those of you looking on this through the Facebook Zoom transmission, we will load up and show you the texts that we're talking about when we get to each hymn, each individual, the 2 hymns. You'll see the text shortly. Yeah, come on in, John.
Your offering delivered. All right, thank you, Joe.
And the timing of this, as you can imagine, is between Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month. And it's part of the concern in the church in general to be aware of race, of racial history. And I've been eager myself to learn more about the songs of the Black church. I feel like a guest, a grateful guest in this regard, because I've been blessed by many of these songs and sung them and didn't know much about them actually, so I've been eager to learn more. Now, songs in general, I have a long-standing interest in the overview here is that I'm working on hymn texts in general. Some of you have attended some previous classes, things like O Sacred Head Now Wounded, classic hymn texts. In other cases, there's a challenge that they were originally in Latin, and then they were translated into German, and then sometimes then from German into English, and there's complications there. And some of those other hymns also had lots of verses that are dropped in our modern hymnals. We don't like 10 verses for our hymns. We don't want to sing that many. And in modern hymnals, when we put all the music there, including the parts, it takes up a big part of the page. And so we're used to having only 2 or 3 or 4 verses for many of our hymns, when originally there might have been 10. But today's 2 examples don't have any translation complications. They don't have any dropped verses. They were, both cases, we were rather brief, 3 verses in English, the original text, and we have them all in our hymnal. But I'm using the word songs quite deliberately because there are different varieties. Some are spirituals. That's a category of song. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But others are more like hymns in the traditional sense. And then there's this anthem. That's another word. Or lift every voice and sing is called an anthem. There are good reasons for that. But songs is the kind of big category of general, most general word. The other word in my title also needs a little introduction. Songs of the Black Church. By this, I'm referring to the African American church. There are also songs from South Africa that we sing. They're in our hymnal. There are songs from all over Africa. We have items in our hymnal from Kenya and Tanzania and so on. No, in this case, it's the African American church. And thirdly, songs of the Black church. We say that, don't we? The Black church. But as I've gotten into this, I realized that's really lumping everything together as if there's one Black church. Well, there's a lot of variety. And it shows up in the music. Maybe we should say the Black churches. There are Roman Catholic churches. African American Roman Catholic churches. High Episcopal churches, very liturgically proper. There's, of course, Pentecostal churches. There's Black Baptist churches. There's prosperity gospel churches. There's Presbyterian and Lutheran churches. There's all kinds of Black churches, and Black church music varies quite a bit too. Traditional hymns. They sing Luther. They sing Wesley. They sing Watts. They have high liturgical kind of music as well. But also then the spirituals as a category. I'm going to just say another paragraph about that. And we have examples we know by heart. And hymns like this Precious Lord, Take My Hand, that comes with a little bit of jazz or blues mixed in. There's lots of different musical strands that come together, and they haven't always coexisted peacefully. You know, there's no fight in a church like a worship fight. and it's usually often to do with music.
Yeah.
And there have been fights in black churches about music. Which kind of music is proper for us to sing? And so I'll get into a little bit of that. Now, for the spirituals, we don't even need our hymnals. The whole point in the spirituals is that you'd have a leader who would sing a phrase, and the congregation would repeat that phrase. You learn the chorus. You can sing the chorus. You don't need a book. You don't need an organ. You don't need a piano. Back in the 19th century, there'd be small communities on plantations. Maybe they had a little building, a little church building, maybe, or maybe just meeting in a field or in a barn. They could sing without any instruments, without any books. And we've inherited and used and sung some of these. We sing them at Christmas, Go Tell It on the Mountain. We sing it on Good Friday, Were You There When They Crucified My Lord? We might sing one on the baptism, Wade in the Water, or communion, Let Us Break Bread Together. These are all from the African American spiritual tradition. And if I say, swing low, sweet chariot, you know the answer. Coming for to carry me, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a leader who says, I looked over Jordan, and what did I see?
Coming for to carry me home.
We know how that goes, right? It's in our heads, right? We're recipients of that, and we don't need a book. And that's a spiritual, right? And there are lots of them. Our hymnal, in the back, there's an index. You can look up hymns by first line, or biblical citations, or church year, but also by source, composers and poets. Luther, you can look up all of his hymns if you want. There's a bunch of them under African American spirituals, because there are no composers known, no poets known, just comes down through the generations. And we have 14 of them in our hymnal. That's one kind of church music for African Americans. And in the 18th century into the 19th, these were well known, but there were also, in fact, in the 1800s, there are specific hymnals for the more organized black churches. The African Methodist Episcopal tradition, AME, is a long-standing tradition, and they had full-scale hymnals in 1800. 1818 hymnal had 314 songs in it, from Watts and Wesley and Luther, lots of traditional songs, and that's the kind of hymn singing they did. Now, there are also the spirituals. So you have traditional hymns, and you have the spirituals. But the first hymn I want us to look at today is the one that's actually called an anthem. That's Lift Every Voice and Sing. So number 841 in our current hymnal, and John can put up, yeah, we've got a couple extra here. John can put up the text for those at home to see the words of this particular item from 1900. That's when it was first sung, and it became known as originally earlier the Black National Anthem. And the NAACP officially designated it in 1919 as their official anthem. They called it anthem because it was originally composed and sung, not in a church service, but in a school concert, in an assembly. It was for a chorus. And in 1900. And since then, it's been sung at many official or public gatherings, anniversaries, meetings, rallies, pageants, and in church. Now, if you look at the very bottom of the page, hymnal, you see the keys of some of these. You see the tiny little small print up. Look at the very bottom there. It's got small print walls, where the text comes from and where the music comes from. And I've been just really interested in tracing the stories that I glimpsed there. James Johnson, 1871. J. Rosamond Johnson, 1873. Well, sure enough, they're brothers. Same last name, born 2 years apart. And when brothers are creative with poetry and music, it's got to think, well, there's a mother here and a father. There's a family thing to look into. Sure enough, I looked this up and I've enjoyed reading about it. The mother, especially highly educated woman, comes from a family that was both Haiti and the Bahamas. Well, there you have a French colonial cultural history and education and a British, English colonial education. And she was a highly educated woman who was a school teacher in Florida. And when she and her husband moved to the States, and her children were kind of brought up in that educational context. And she taught at a particular school in Florida called the Stanton School for Negroes. And her boys had a good education from her and at the school. And James, the poet, he went on to Atlanta University and graduate school. And his brother, Rosamond, he went on to the New England Conservatory of Music as a composer and went to England to do further study in composition. And they both came back to Florida and they taught in Florida. James became the principal of the Stanton School where his mother had taught. And Rosamond was nearby in another school called the Florida Baptist Academy. Well, the principal, as Lincoln's birthday arrived in 1900, he said, we're going to have an assembly. I'm going to write the poem. And my brother, Rosamond, is going to compose the music. And our school, 500 kids, going to sing this anthem. That was its first performance in 1900, a school performance of children at that school. So I'm going to get your audience participation here a little bit. Just first of all, how many of you just looking at this think, oh yeah, I remember that. We've sung this. Does it look familiar? You've sung it, maybe you don't. And secondly, I'd like to volunteer to read, not sing, read verse 1. John, thank you.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song of faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you. So the text is a little complex for a hymn. The choirs can learn it and sing it, but it's not easy as a text to sing. It's a big range of low and high notes. It's got some rhythmic challenges. We can do it, and congregations do it, but it takes a little practice, a little preparation. And of course, African American congregations learn to do it by heart and sing it often. This first verse, as many of these songs do, it refers to singing. Lift every voice and sing. And then there's sing a song full of the faith. So singing is really a crucial part within the song. It talks about singing as well. I have one comment about the text, and then I want to see if you have any reactions or questions about it. I was struck that Mr. Johnson, James Johnson, he has no hesitation in this first verse to say, the dark past has taught us. Dark and light, or white and black, are pretty sensitive categories for us in our language. But he says dark past with no problems. And in verse 2, there's the white gleam of our bright star. I notice that because in some modern hymnals, the sensitivity we have today about prejudice to do with color has led some editors to change the text right there. Mm-hmm. One of them says, if you look at verse 2 at the end, they don't want to say white gleam, so they changed it. Bright gleam of our bright star. Now, a poet wouldn't like bright being in both places. Yeah. But the sensitivities of modern editors can prevail. But he didn't seem to have that kind of color-sensitive language worries, dark past or white gleam. That struck me when I saw the variations on the text in modern hymnals. Now, we have the original here. This doesn't change it. He did write it this way, but some hymnals have changed. Any other reactions or comments, questions about verse 1? Caleb?
I was just caught by the fact that it almost presents itself as if this new day has come and challenges aren't still happening in that first verse. When we all are very well aware, even the time period that they live, that were incredible challenges to be a person of color, as there are still today. So that caught me by surprise, I think.
There are a couple of references in the text to that, and you think of in 1900, the Reconstruction has, in the previous generation, when these boys were little, these states and the previous Confederacy, they had made big progress in having representatives, senators, mayors, governors from the African American community. And then it kind of all got turned around and there was repression again. But there was a glimpse of hope in post-Civil War times. And then this collision with a changed reality. And ever since, it's been kind of a collision of hope and of barriers. But there was a time, 1880s, there was a lot of hope. 1870s, 1880s, when they were young. So there's a mixed picture here. Now the song of Berta, go ahead.
Was his family enslaved in Florida earlier?
No, they had come, a mother from Haiti and her family had come from Haiti and the Bahamas. Apparently were not. They were not immediately, in the immediate generation of the boys and their parents from slave experience. Maybe their predecessors had been in Haiti or something, I'm not sure.
But it didn't say anything about his father?
I haven't learned anything about his father yet. Still learning. Looking at this.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that they've used the word faith and hope.
Faith and what?
Hope.
And hope, right. Sing a song full of the faith from the dark past, but then hope that the present has brought us. New day begun. Let us march on.
Obviously, we know faith, hope, and love, and the greatest. I just wonder if that was intention.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched the Wham MLK interfaith service last Sunday night, but I was right in the middle of the choir at Mount Olivet. And we sang this hymn, or I guess it was a congregational hymn, but it was really moving and I don't know, humbling if that's the right word, but to be singing this surrounded by a black choir, it just took on. I mean, these people have, you know, walked the walk, so to speak, and it just took on a completely different meaning for me. I felt really blessed to just be, you know, in that presence.
And they knew it by heart, right?
Oh, yeah.
They didn't need a book.
No, no,
They could sing it.
yeah.
All
And
three
they-
verses.
Yeah.
And they put their whole bodies into expressing
Yeah.
what they were singing.
I did notice that everybody was swaying
Yeah.
except
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah.
Was swaying.
That was the white Lutheran in the
He was
midst.
working on this sway.
Yeah.
Dale got the sway down.
Yeah.
And so did Jim. Jim,
Jim
even,
had it down.
he didn't sway the whole time, but I was watching.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, Joe New will love this.
Well, it quickly spread from that one school to other schools. And then there was a journal, a magazine called, came out of Atlanta, a monthly called Colored American. And this woman, Victoria Matthews, she wrote up an article about the Johnson brothers and their anthem. And it spread fast to lots of schools, lots of places. And it's being sung on special occasions, Emancipation Day, Frederick Douglass's birthday, Juneteenth. And then in 1919, the NAACP declared it their official song, their official anthem. And ever since, it's been sung at pageants and anniversaries and civil rights gatherings. And phrases from this have entered into a lot of common eardrums because, for example, it was quoted at some length at Barack Obama's inauguration by Reverend Lowry. And there are phrases that show up in books. Lift Every Voice is also the name, in the name of the current voting rights campaign push by Biden and the Democratic Party in Congress right now. They have a name for that document, and it's called Lift Every Voice. And other phrases, like the second verse has some famous phrases in it. Let's have somebody else read verse 2.
All right. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chasing rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our parents sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast.
Thank you. Stony the road, this phrase is in a number of books right now. Skip Gates, Professor Gates from Harvard, who has some television documentaries and it's in public television, including Tracing Our Roots. He has a book about the Black Church and the book about restoration, and others have used phrases like that. Stony the road is one. The music enters into the second verse, especially. You can emphasize certain words in the tune, right? And it's by the height or the pitch goes up, and also the length that you stay on that syllable. On the right-hand side there on the last part of the hymn. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. That's the one that gets a big emphasis. It's a high note, and stay on it. Pretty strong stuff. Blood of the slaughtered. Now, one more verse is a real prayer. An anthem might not be a prayer, but this has in verse 3 a prayer verse right through. It's sung to God. And so I'd like somebody to read verse 3 as well. Okay, further, please.
God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, Keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shattered beneath thy hand, may we forever stand. True to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you. There's a new book all about this anthem called May We Forever Stand. Another phrase comes out of here by a Princeton University professor, actually, about the way this anthem has threaded its way through 20th century history, being sung at this event, that event, big civil rights gatherings, even a Chicago Bulls game. Once opening of Black History Month, they really did use it like an anthem at the beginning of the game. So it's an interesting book. She doesn't really spend much time on its use as a hymn in church. It's mostly about the pageants or the big civil rights events or inaugurations. But she does mention, one paragraph only, that there was a time in the middle of the century when it faded from popular use for African-American communities. We Shall Overcome became very popular. Early civil rights movement, very much easier to sing in a big gathering. And this more complicated song seemed to be old-fashioned and wasn't so popular, and it seemed to be fading away, but the church kept it in use. And she says many of the young people in the middle of the 20th century, they only heard it at church, but they heard it and they knew it, and then it's come back now more into a more prominent use. And one phrase from this last verse, let's see what strikes you. One phrase is interesting: true to our God, true to our native land. Well, if you call it the Black national anthem, a little deceptive in a way, unless by this phrase, native land, you think that Johnson or the original singers of this, maybe they were thinking about having a nation of their own, or maybe it was to do with Africa, Liberia, repatriation, people going back, as you heard the story of Jacob Jones. Is it a national anthem? Well, I've looked up other things he's written. I can quote a few things more. That this Johnson, the text, the author of the text, he wrote quite a bit. He means this to be the US of A. That's our native land to him. And others can maybe read it different ways, but he meant it to be, in this third verse, I praise a hymn to God in reference to this, America is our native land. So it's interesting possible ways to read the phrase, but at least my understanding of his position was not to claim a separate nationhood or to aspire to a new national kind of identity somewhere else, but to claim American citizenship and loyalty in himself. Anything about verse 3 that strikes you? We can.
I like the just when you mentioned the whole note, you know, and that you said it was a prayer. You know, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. You know, it's.
That's the
really, yeah, that's the emphasis. Yeah.
I was gonna say, even in our liturgy for the Thanksgiving of the table, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, that's a beginning of one of our Thanksgiving.
You're right.
And so, I mean, I don't think I ever realized.
This is where it comes from.
Yeah,
that's right.
So that was just an interesting connection to make how we've kind of woven that into our own liturgy.
There's lots of phrases from this that have echoed through political speeches, liturgical snippets, book titles. I've seen more and more as I've looked into this. There are multiple books called Stony the Road, from a phrase from this poet and from this Johnson. Well, as I say, he wrote more, and quite a bit more. And he took an interest in the spirituals. As I say, the congregational use helped save this later on when it fell into disrepair. But in his time, the spirituals had fallen into less and less use. There were congregations and whole church bodies. In 1900, right when he was writing this, 1910, 1920, when he writes more, there were lots of congregations, African-American congregations, that said, no, the spirituals, that's from slavery time. That's when we were not literate. Now we should sing proper hymns with full texts and traditional hymns. We shouldn't sing the spirituals anymore. It became a contentious issue within the African-American community, within Black churches. Some thought they were so tied to slavery's past that we have to move beyond them. They're too simple. And this man, the poet of great sophistication, he spoke up and wrote in favor of hanging on to the spirituals and using them and appreciating them and singing them. He wrote even a poem about it, and then I'll read you one line from this poem, which has also become famous, and then a little more. "O black and unknown bards of long ago, how came your lips to touch the sacred fire?" These unknown poets, 100 years before, had tasted the sacred fire of poetry. They somehow had the inspiration, and he's giving them credit here in this, and that they are unknown now. So here's his longer quote about this, and it ends with a kind of a biting jab at some other churches, and we'll see how that plays out too in the 20th century. These songs, and he's not only writing about them, he did a book to edit the spirituals, to put them in books and put music on them. Many times they were just oral traditions. We just heard and knew it, but they should also be preserved, he said, in books. So he and his brother can find their talents, put them into books and to add music. And in the introduction to that book, he said, these songs have passed through a period when the front ranks of the Negro race would have been willing to let them die. Immediately following emancipation, those ranks revolted against everything connected with slavery. And among those things were the spirituals. It became a sign of not being progressive or educated to sing them. This was a natural reaction, but nevertheless, a sadly foolish one. It was left for the older generation to keep them alive by singing them at prayer meetings, class meetings, experience meetings, and revivals. By that he means not the regular Sunday morning service, but special events, special prayer groups, revivals. While the new choir with the organ and books of idiotic anthems held sway on Sundays. The new choir with the organ and books of idiotic anthems. So he's kind of pointed about that. He doesn't like this dismissal of the spirituals in favor of the organ and the anthems. Well, this is a segue to the other hymn today, but it's a big issue. The spirituals were kept alive in multiple ways, and one of them was the concert version by Fisk University Choir. Fisk was one of the historic Black colleges, and they had a choir, and they went on tour. And they did concert versions of the spirituals, and that's how they became known broadly and internationally, which is a little different. It's more organized, a concert version, but still, the Fisk choir is to be credited, along with the older generation in the prayer meetings and revivals, kept them alive. The second one we want to look at today, and it intersects the same topic of the kind of musical clash within Black churches. But before we go, any other questions or comments about this one?
Paul, I just remembered at Towson University, at their football game, every game, they had a soloist come out like in the pregame before the national anthem. And this gentleman sang, I think he didn't sing all verses. I think he sang the first verse.
Oh,
But
awesome, good.
so I just remembered that that was, you know, a statement, you know, that it was right there with the national anthem.
People sing along?
No, he was, now some may have, but for the most part, it was a solo.
No, interesting. So it's still part of that, and it's like an anthem.
Yeah.
So look at 773 in your hymnal, and Con will have that up for those at home and has it up already. Precious Lord, take my hand. In the 20th century, this represents another phase or stage of Black song, where blues and gospel come into the mix. And if you look at the bottom fine print here in this case, you see the text, Thomas A. Dorsey, and the music by George Allen. Thomas A. Dorsey, look at that lifespan. 1899, he was born in the year that Johnson was composing, thinking, and drafting, and then the year before, Lift Every Voice was first sung, and he lived all the way to 1993. Long lifespan, 94 years. I don't want to admit how long I thought this was Tommy Dorsey. Tommy Dorsey was a trombone player, big band leader, somebody else entirely.
But about the same time frame, because his one of the former employees at the New Jersey Synod was Grace Dorsey. And Tommy Dorsey was her husband's cousin.
Oh.
So
now Tommy Dorsey didn't live as long as Thomas Dorsey, but they started out in the same generation. But Thomas, he lived 1993 is a long time. And his life story illustrates some things about the Black song and songs of the Black church. He too grew up with a very musical mother. His father was a preacher, sharecropper in a sort, and his mother a piano player. And so he learned music and he went to church. But as a teenager, it was the contrast that was set up in his life between his Friday night, Saturday night music, played piano in a bar, and his Sunday morning music. The church. So he had two kinds of musical experiences. This went on into his adulthood as well. He became well known in Chicago. He moved to Chicago and connected with a band and became associated with some big time singers. Bessie Smith, he was her band leader for a time, and Ma Rainey. You know this recent movie, Ma Rainey. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Yes,
it was a band.
Last year. Yeah.
And this is a jazz band, right? And he was a pianist for her. So the Saturday night side of his musical life was flourishing. And he played and he arranged and he was shrewd too. He copyrighted some of his music, had it printed and had rights to it and so on. On the church side of his life, he also played and led, and he used some of this rhythm of the jazz or blues rhythm in those Sunday morning, in those church services too. But now that's where the tension came. Many of those churches, especially the big established churches in Chicago, they were of the opinion that the spirituals and the blues and jazz, that's not church music. We shouldn't use that kind of music. We should use proper, staid, white European hymns and Lutheran tradition too. So they sang Watts and Wesley and Luther, and the choirs, when they did anthems, they did Handel's Messiah and pieces. They sang Haydn, they sang Mozart, they had orchestra. That was proper music for them. And in the big churches, there's some specific ones. Pilgrim Baptist was really a big one in Chicago at the time. And they would put on special musicale, as they call it, a big Sunday afternoon, evening program full of opera and Haydn and Mozart. And so that was. But his little church elsewhere in Chicago had a thriving. Ebenezer was his church. They had a thriving gospel choir that he had fostered, and he was using some of his piano rhythms and blues kind of singing, and people loved it. The hollers and the amens and so on, and this kind of music. Well, the big change happened when the pastor over at Pilgrim Baptist, where they sang Haydn and Mozart and so on, he invited this music guy from Ebenezer, from the little church, over to his church for one particular Sunday. This is a very specific history. In February of 1932, exact dates are known. And Dorsey brought his little gospel choir over there, and they hollered. And they thumped that piano. And people got into it, and pretty soon the pastor, his name was J.C. Austin, he hired Dorsey to join his staff at Pilgrim Baptist. But at first, he didn't have charge of the senior choir. The senior choir did Sunday mornings, and they were traditionalists. He had the gospel choir, not the senior choir, so you have this kind of tension, but his stuff caught on really, really fast. And during that year, it spread to other churches, and they formed an association of gospel choirs in the Chicago area. It quickly became really popular. They made it a national convention of gospel choirs, really fast moving phenomenon. And they had a triumphant concert in summer of 1932. Gospel blues related music. Well, that's when the story of this hymn comes in, because his great triumph turned to personal tragedy. At the end of the summer, in September, his wife died in childbirth, and the baby too. Oh. First child. And his life fell apart. You can imagine. You don't want to imagine. But that's what happened, and sometime later, and he couldn't play, he didn't lead his choir. The new school year started in September, and he just couldn't do it. And in his kind of memoir, he said a friend took him over to a place where there was a piano, and they sat down, and he said he was just despairing still. A tune kind of came into his memory. And he said, I was just fumbling around at the piano with an old tune. And he put new words to it. If you look again at the bottom of the page here, it says the tune there is from George Allen, several generations beforehand, before Dorsey, adapted by Thomas Dorsey. Now this tune was known for another hymn, but it came to Dorsey's memory, and in his grief, he added these words. These are powerful words for the situation that he was in. Words of heartache, right? I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. And words of petition. Take my hand. Lead me on. Lead me home. That's where this song comes from this jazz or gospel, blues, choir, chorus leader having a personal tragedy. But music kind of brought him back. The tune was in his memory. He added these words. that very next week, he went back to the church and he shared this with his gospel choir. And they sang it with him. They agreed together with him by singing this. And you maybe know this too. It's really quite mournful and yet hopeful. It calls on the Lord to lead when we can't do anything more than call for help. My life is almost gone. The day is almost gone, and at the river I stand, and so on. It's really quite powerful. Well, then the next week, the gospel choir shared it with the congregation. And they welcomed him back, and they all sang this song, knowing, of course, what had happened. And he resumed his activity in the congregation and beyond. And this convention or network of gospel choirs had their meetings or conventions, and they pretty soon they sang it there, and people heard it, and it spread. National Baptist Convention in 1935, and the Los Angeles National Baptist Convention in 1937. He had become the music director for these big events, and another Chicago singer, not Bessie Smith or Ma Rainey, famous enough, but another one, Mahalia Jackson.
Wow.
She sang it at the National Convention. Wow. And then she included it in her concerts and in her recordings. And, you know, she became quite famous. And she often sang this when she had concerts and recordings worldwide. So it became really widely known, and through Mahalia Jackson especially. And he lived on a long life and composed and published lots and lots of other songs. And some of them are in other hymnals too. I have other, to show you these earlier, African American Heritage Hymnal. I mean, there's 500 hymns here, right? This is a Catholic publishing house. This is a Augsburg Fortress, a Lutheran publishing house for especially Lutheran congregations. This Far by Faith, with lots of hymns, spirituals and otherwise. And some of his songs are also in other hymnals. We just have the one by Thomas Dorsey, but it's a powerful one, and it's a great one. Some of you know this too, and perhaps have sung it. So those are the two I wanted to cover, and they're just samples. There's a richness in the history of songs of the Black Church, and these are just two examples. Have any questions or comments about this one? I didn't stop to read it. I should leave it all.
Maria Hansen
I was
over
just
many
gonna
times.
say,
Yeah.
Whenever I hear it, I hear Gia singing it.
Right, and it's a tune and a text that goes together now. Through the storm, through the night, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Maybe when you know the story, you can appreciate more of the depth to it.
Yeah.
And so it has a resonance. But it also has a beat. It has a rhythm. It has that blues kind of sway, maybe to it, that he brought into Black church singing with the gospel choir. And the senior choirs in many of those churches, then they gave way. They didn't sing Haydn or Handel much more on Sunday mornings. And now they sang gospel and blues. And, it's an ongoing issue right now. Black churches have to puzzle out. What about rap? What about rap music? Can we have rap, Christian rap singers? And will young people like rap? Can they bring rap music into the church? That's a current parallel kind of a situation. Right?
Paul, just at the Lutheran Youth Gathering, now, this was a number of years ago, they had like a workshop on hip hop music. And of course, it was predominantly white young people, but that was one of the most popular like workshops, not really a workshop, but that was attended, is this hip hop worship.
Yeah, that's a current issue, and I've seen some things recently. If you ever have a chance to see Skip Gates' two-part history of the Black church. It's personal for him too. He grew up a certain way, and then he kind of didn't care as much about the church, and now he's come back to taking an interest in the church. But the last segment is about hip hop and rap music. What are the current pastors, music directors, parents, and young people thinking about the use of rap in church?
Is it true that let's see, I don't know all the right time frames, but that tavern songs, probably in England, were used, the tunes were used for what became hymns.
There's some truth to that, but there's also a dead end. There was a form of music called the bar form. It has to do with bars of music.
Oh.
That was thought for a time to be tavern music.
Oh.
And Luther used a certain bar form of composition, and people thought, well, he got his music from the tavern.
Okay.
Now, there is some of that, but
Yeah.
not as much as it looked from that, what the French call a faux ami, a false friend. The word can lead you astray. If you mean by bar, a tavern, then you're going the wrong direction. Bar music was what was really meant. So it's not as true as sometimes
it seems. There was a Christian, I mean, I think they're still going on. There was a Christian group called Glad, contemporary Christian group, and they did a song using We Gather Together, the tune and the words. First they did it the way we would do it in church, and then they went through what if the Beach Boys had written that style? What if it was written in the hills of Tennessee? What if it was written, and they went back,
they did one version.
and then they did their own.
They did one version. It was
there's a name.
bar.
There's a name for this too. It's become widespread enough. You take, for example, we have a lot of hymns in our hymnal from Charles Wesley, like "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing." He wrote a bunch. Even "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," Christmas carols. And composers today and arrangers can take the same words and maybe even aspects of the melody and arrange it quite differently, and it's called retuning. They retune Wesley. Bring him up to date, give him a little rhythm, you give him a little syncopation, maybe give him a little snap, and do it another way.
Well, that thing that they did always made me think that if the message was right, the tune doesn't matter. If the tune speaks to the current audience and the message is on track, then it's appropriate for church.
Well, the tunes help us remember the words.
Right.
If it works, right? In fact, you might not think you have memorized much poetry.
Oh yeah.
You start singing Christmas carols.
Yeah.
And you realize how much you can remember of words that are poetry, because the tune helps it flow.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if it's a good tune in the sense that it helps us remember the words, then it's a good thing, which is true of new tunes being attached. We sang one today. Gustav Holst wrote the famous piece of music called The Planets. And Jupiter, there's 7 planets, I think he only did 7. Jupiter is a particular tune that was first set to music. Oh God, beyond all praising, we worship you today. And it was a tune we sang today. At the end of, it's been used for many, for multiple texts. And so tunes can be repackaged.
Yeah, we were listening to WWFM, do a lot, but anyway, they were playing Holst, The Planets, and Lisa said, isn't that a hymn we sing?
Right.
That's right.
I said, yes.
Yeah.
That's right, we've taken over that too. There is a very good show, I'm gonna close now, we're up against the time, but at 1 o'clock on WWFM on Sundays.
Right.
And 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
1 o'clock, I think, is the one that's, there are 2 names to this.
I listen to both of them too.
Anyway, they're really church-related music. Organ and choral.
Yeah.
Sounds choral.
Sounds
I think
choral.
Sounds choral is at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's all choirs. And it's usually related to the time of church year.
Right.
And at 1 o'clock, it's lift every voice.
I want to say lift every voice and sing, but
Right.
Voices in
all gold. Yeah.
Anyway, at 1 o'clock, 89.1. It's a plug here.
Yeah, it's liturgical. It's usually, it deals with the seasons of the church.
Yeah, yeah. So
Sometimes even the Sundays, each
yeah,
Sunday. You know.
Epiphany recently, and anyway, that's a kind of a Sunday afternoon chance for this kind of music. So anyway, thank you for your attention today, and those of you at home. And in general, look at the bottom of the page for a hymn. If you like it especially, look and see, well, who wrote that? And look up their name, Wikipedia or something, and learn lots more about the tune, but especially about the words. That fine print at the bottom can lead you to some exciting discoveries, as it has for me. So thank you all, and
Heart and voice.
With heart and voice.
with heart and voice. That's
Yes,
it.
very
Thank
good.
you.
Joan.
We knew voice was in there. somewhere.
Yeah. I want to thank Dr. Rorem.
Yeah.
Another session sometime this spring, Paul.
Sure.
We've got Vicar Kayla will be 2 weeks from today on Joy. So we look forward to that as well. So thank you all for being a part of this today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David and Con, for the help with the technology for folks at home.
Yeah, that's great.
It was awesome. Thank you so much. It was great to see everybody here. See you next week.